Welcome to another episode of An N of One, where we explore the individual stories of some of the world's most famous applied behavioral scientists to understand where they are and how they got there. I'm joined today by Chelsea. Chelsea, it's so good to have you. Thank you so much for coming. I'm always glad that I get to talk to you. So I'm excited for us to enjoy this story together. I'm going to start at the very beginning because that's where we always start. Tell me about like childhood Chelsea. If I went and found like 10-year-old Chelsea and I said, all right, like what does 10-year-old Chelsea think she's it's an astronaut, a lawyer, applied behavioral scientist? Like what is 10-year-old Chelsea like?
Definitely not an applied behavioral scientist. 10-year-old Chelsea wanted to be either an Olympic swimmer or a medical doctor. And I'll specify that because I know that there's various types of doctors, but when you're 10, you don't know that. So I started swimming around the age of 10 competitively. How I got into that is like looking back, I'm like, oh, that's very interesting. I would used to do laps like unprompted, used to just laps in the pool during free swim. Like I was the weird kid that would go in free swim, and instead of playing with my friends, I would do like, oh, I need to get to 20 laps today because yesterday I did 19. And before I would play with my friends, I would try to get more and more laps in. And then someone finally told me like, hey, you should probably join a swim team because that's not normal. If you really like to do this, then that's called distance swimming. And you should probably try to put some structure around that and train. So
there was a point for going a long way to go absolutely nowhere.
Exactly. And so I joined a swim team, and then my whole life from age, I would say 11 on through when I went to college, like kind of revolved around this incremental performance improvement kind of thing. The first barrier I faced to that was I was overweight. I was an obese child. I was one of those statistics. I was a child with obesity. And it got to the point in my training where swimming, by the way, is awesome because it's one of the only sports where body size doesn't really matter. In fact, you're more buoyant if you have more fat, so that's great. But at a certain point, I got very competitive and I started entering like the elite leagues, and I needed that to get to the next level. I needed to lose weight and add more muscle, and that's kind of where this like incremental focus on performance improvement came in. And I started to get really interested in like data, and this sounds really pathological when I'm saying it out loud. I started.
This is a safe space on here on An N of One.
I was like, I started to like want to get better and better and like track where I came from and be able to like reflect on that. And I would see like gains in swimming. Is another great thing I liked about swimming, I think, is that I could see like improvements in the form of my time dropping, and everything in swimming revolves around that. So like when you go to a meet, the heat that you're in an event is dictated by how fast you are, like what's your best time coming into it, and just seeing yourself move down the heat sheets because the faster you get, they save the fastest race for last, usually the closest race for last. Like seeing yourself move down that and being able to track times, like I loved it. So I continued swimming through college.
Wait,
and
we're going too fast. We're already to college,
and
I have more questions. Don't go too fast. So I have questions. So here you are, like turbo swimmer, and this is like dominating your life. Do you think of yourself as running experiments, right? Or is it just sort of a means to an end where it's all like, no, it's all about the outcome?
Well, no, I don't think I thought of myself as running experiments, but I think that's what I was doing. Like looking back, I feel like that's what I was doing. I'd be like, oh, I wonder if today I eat more protein, like how I'm going to feel at practice. Or like, I wonder if, oh, that cake that I had for lunch today, like I wonder how that's going to affect my times at practice if we do like a time trial or something. So like in hindsight, I think that's kind of like where I got that mentality, or maybe, or maybe I was drawn to swimming because because I have always had that inclination to like want to track stuff and see like progress.
Wait, does that come out in other parts of your life? Were you like also tracking other things as a 10-year-old?
Oh, not necessarily as a 10-year-old. I started like, okay, so yeah, so as part of like losing weight, I like because I was at an unhealthy weight. Like it wasn't like this like pathological, I need to be skinny kind of thing. It was like I want to get to the next level in swimming. And that was the first time where I was like, my weight's getting in the way of that. So now I care about it and now I'm gonna try to change it. So my team had a nutritionist and I started working with her and she completely changed my life. Like it kind of gave me the tools of like putting a little bit more structure around that tracking. So like she made it very easy for me to get the right, she called them like macros, but like I didn't know what that meant. But like she literally gave me a meal plan. Like, all right, I'm gonna give you a couple of meal plans. Like this is what, and she brought my parents in because I was, 11-year-old me at that point, 11 or 12-year-old me. Like obviously I'm not doing the grocery shopping. Like she brought my parents into the conversation and was like, all right, here's what I want Chelsea to be eating. 2 cheese sticks and an orange for this for afternoon snack. Before swimming, she's gonna eat a little more carbs. She's gonna eat this. And I want her to eat exactly these brands. And it made it super easy to follow this meal plan. And it worked. And we tracked progress over weeks. So I would meet with her once a week and they'd use one of those little pinchy things. It was never weight based. It was all like, what's your percent fat? She didn't really care what I weighed, which is also very healthy. Like it was more like, all right, let's see how much progress you're making. You should be gaining muscle and losing fat. And I forget what they're called, but we do the little pinchy thing once a week and she would write it down this book and this Roxanne book, and that was her name, which is a very like nutrition trainer name. And she would show me over time, like where I'd come from and how far I had to go until I reached like a healthy elite body fat.
Have you
Um,
sent Roxy a thank you note for getting you into applied behavioral
I
science? I feel like you have to
wish
track this woman
I
down.
know. I feel like I need to track her down. I don't even know. Yeah, I haven't kept in touch with her, and I would love to because I feel like, yeah, she totally has set me on this trajectory of
I had a lovely.
visualization, right? Right? Like reflecting on your progress and making little tiny changes and making it easy for yourself. Like meal prep was a big part of that. Like make a decision once, like prep the whole week's meals, and then like you don't have to rely on like, oh, I had a crazy day. Like let me just grab this bag of chips because it's easy, like um
So you're learning a
yeah.
lot of applied behavioral science at age 13 here. This is
A ton, like a ton. Like not that I like thought of it like that. I was like, how do I get faster? Like I want to drop X amount of time and how do I get there? Like that's what I cared about. I didn't look at the numbers of like the percent body fat. I was like looking at, all right, Roxanne, like if I'm gonna do this and give up my cake for lunch, like I want to see next month's me, I want to see myself drop 2 seconds in this event. And it worked. Like, I mean, it's because it's sometimes not linear, um but yeah, like seeing that trend over time of dropping time in my case was really motivating.
Yeah, good hidden lesson there about health psychology too. Nobody actually cares about the numbers. I was having this debate with somebody in
Yeah.
diabetes the other day where about all the messaging that has been like all about controlling the numbers. I'm like, people don't care about the numbers. They care about whether like, they could do the things they want to do, right?
Or like they care about trends, right? Like they just want to know like red or green, like are you better than you were on average or are you not or are you going the other way? Like like because little tiny things can influence, I don't know, I hate weight in general, like can influence your weight in any given day. Like, oh, you were healthy and you started the day with a big Stanley of water. Like you're gonna weigh more, but that doesn't mean that you're not on the right trajectory still. Anyway, so I feel like yeah, trends over time or averages or whatever, are probably better.
I love this. I love it that like you're in. And I noted that on your LinkedIn when we're talking about Kobe, in there is the varsity swimming and diving. Clearly this is carrying forward into college. Like,
Yes,
this is
so
a
it's
big
scary.
part of
Yeah,
your identity.
it was a huge part of my identity. So club swimming, very different from like high school swimming or any other swimming. So I'm sure other sports have this too. Like club soccer is very different from like school soccer. So yeah, I was a club swimmer. Continued right on swimming in college. It's like a culture. Um, you meet very similar people. So a lot of my best friends in college ended up being swimmers. Um, yeah, and it just kind of continued on through there. It was like a refresh, a different coaching perspective, um, added lifting in, which is a whole other piece of data tracking that I got to get into.
Well, and very
Um,
trackable, right? Like, if
and
you
very
are,
trackable.
this
Yeah.
very particular weight.
Yep.
So, did you choose Colby for swimming, or was there at least
Oh
some
no.
notion that you weren't going to be an Olympic swimmer by this point?
So I kind of had latched on to pre-med at that point. I wanted to be a medical doctor. And I went to Colby because I also like thought 16-year-old me when I was applying for colleges. I also like knew I needed to be a bio major. It looked good. I was like, that is a track to pre-med. And Colby had a really great bio program. So yeah, and I wanted to do a liberal arts education. So that is what drew me to Colby.
Yeah, I mean, as a Swarthmore student, clearly I'm all for the like smart
Yeah, yeah, you
science.
get it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. No, I definitely I love that. I will note that you, of course, did not graduate with a degree in biology. So talk to me about this delta, right? You come in being like pre-med bio, like this is
Yeah,
where
all the
I'm
way.
going. I'm on this track. Where is the first part where you start to
Yeah.
maybe go, this isn't quite what I thought?
Yeah. So I took an intro to psych class because, okay, so first I took my first class that I signed up for, having tested out of intro bio, which I wish I had taken it, by the way, but ecology of wildlife disease. And I was like, sounds so interesting. I'm going to love this. It was at 8 a.m. on Monday morning in my first semester in college. And I loved the professor. So, Russell Danner, if you're listening, loved you, was not interested in ecology of wildlife diseases. And I was like, is this going to be what the rest of my major is going to be? Like learning about stuff that I'm
Is
like
this
not
the
truly
rest of
passionate
my
about.
life?
Yeah, I was like, oh man, like what did I get myself into? And then I was like, so that got me looking. I like went and looked at the rest of the course load. Like, what else do I have to take? It's a bio major. And like herbology. I'm like, I feel like I was in an episode of Harry Potter, but I don't think Harry Potter was out at that time. That's how old I am. Like, and I was like, oh, I have to take like a plant class. Like that is also not what I see myself doing, like memorizing plant species and going out in the woods and like hunting plants.
I'm going to be a
Uh,
doctor, and this is not on the way to doctor.
like I didn't see how it connected. Now I do, but like I was like, like that's not what I want. So I took an intro to psych class, and I was like, okay, this is much more along the lines of what I was thinking. Like I loved learning about cognitive psychology in particular. Like I loved learning about memory and how people learn, and because it's like immediately applicable to what we're doing every day in college. Um, yeah, not so much in the swimming front because I feel like I was an overthinker on that front. But like there are some situations where you just need to let your habits take over and trust your training. And I feel like my head constantly got in the way of that. So I feel like maybe there was a reason why I was drawn to psychology and I was really interested um in why there are like individual differences there.
And it wasn't post intro psych. Was it immediately clear like this is the thing, and I'm all in on this track? You sound like kind of an all in person, so
100,
you were
yep,
like,
100%. I
what?
was like, yep, this is more of the vibe I was looking for, and I changed my major like first semester.
But you
Um,
did also stay interested in chemistry, right? I mean,
I
you
did. So
seem to
like
have other
I
bench
yeah,
science
so,
stuff.
so yeah, I understood very like clearly how chemistry linked into medicine. And I was like, okay, I'm very interested in this still, particularly like biochem. So I ended up getting like a chemistry minor, just because I wanted to take chemistry classes tended to be what I gravitated towards, for electives. Um, so yeah, so I ultimately kind of came out with a little bit of that, I guess they call it a hard science minor, with a psychology major, and I thought that was like it felt like the right balance for me.
And did you
Um,
still think, hey, I'm going to go be a doctor?
yeah, so I still thought I was going to be a doctor right up until junior year. I was like straight and narrow on the path. I'm going to be a doctor. And then I started working in maybe sophomore year. I can't remember. It was sophomore or junior year. I started working in a memory and language lab, with a professor that I met in intro psych, and I took one of her seminars after. And I thought the topics she studied, she studied older adults and she studied memory and learning and how that changes as people age. And I absolutely loved it and asked to work in her lab. And I very quickly like discovered, hey, I'm pretty good at designing experiments. And I like working with older adults. So as part of my work in that lab, I would design little experiments in this software called ePrime, and I would actually get to interact kind of like in a patient doctor way with older adults from the community and have them complete these experiments and then at the end get to explain what it was about. And I really liked that process. And then being able to like open a box at the end and look at all the data accumulated together. It was kind of like Christmas when you get to like when you get to like play with the data at the end and analyze it and anyway, so that's like where I first was like, oh, research could be a thing. Like there's such a world where like I go have that focus instead of a clinical focus. Um, and I stayed over the summer of my junior year in the same lab and did that like full time for a summer. And by the end of that, I knew that I probably was going to switch gears and apply to grad school. A little late, you know, fall of senior year, I was like, okay, I'm not going to apply to med school anymore. I'm going to apply to grad school.
And talk to me about the application. Like, were you sort of choosing based on advisor? Were there particular schools or programs that were interesting? Like, how did you sort of get to Georgetown?
Yeah, so I applied like not in the most systematic manner. I went and looked like I did it all wrong, man. I did it all wrong. I didn't email advisors in advance and ask if they were accepting students. I looked at programs. I knew I was very interested in cognitive psychology. I also wanted to add in um like something like imaging, like neuroimaging sounded really cool. I had learned about it in my classes, didn't have an opportunity to do that at a small liberal arts college like Colby. So I was like, hey, in grad school, I want to do the cognitive thing more, but I also want to add in, I want to put people in an MRI and I want to look at brain data. Like, I think that would be really
The
cool.
medical part of you is still very much on
Exactly.
track,
I was like,
right?
I
How
want to
is the
understand
brain?
mechanisms. Like, yeah, like, okay, this is really cool. We're looking at reaction time and accuracy results, but I want to see like what's going on under the hood. Like, it was more of like, yeah, my desire to look at like exactly how things work. So I looked at programs and ended up cognitive neuroscience fit that. And I applied to a variety of different advisors, ended up only getting two interviews, and absolutely loved meeting with I knew like instantly when I went to Georgetown and I met with my advisor, I was like, this. So I picked it based on mentor. It wasn't necessarily the program, although I'm very glad in hindsight that I ended up in the program that I did. Because I also had a sister program in public policy and I got exposed to that. And I think that has also kind of shaped my career trajectory. Like I was like, oh, like with research, you can inform policy for Americans. Like you can actually like apply that and influence people's lives, which is I think like where the medical like wanting to be a medical doctor came from too. Like I want to help people. I want to yeah, like use your expertise in a way that affects people's lives. Yeah. So that's how I ended up at Georgetown. I was a smaller city girl, I guess. Portland, Maine is where I'm from. And I interviewed in Washington, D.C. and was terrified because like it's a very different vibe when you go to D.C. and you know, fresh out of college and or still in college at the time of interviewing. And I was like a bit overwhelmed, but also very excited. And like I felt that mentorship fit and everyone in the lab. I felt that like kind of peer connection like pretty instantly. And I went with my gut. Like I didn't really like think about what looked good on paper. I just was like, this feels like a good next move.
And
And I was lucky enough to like get an
did
offer.
you
Yeah.
did you go in thinking, hey, I'm gonna go then because I get my PhD and then I become an academic and I'm like basically become my mentors?
I did not. So I went in and was actually surprised that that was the expectation.
What
So I
did
was
you
like,
think was gonna happen?
so I was like, I'm gonna go like, and then I got in and I was like, I didn't know. Like, so I didn't know. I was
You
like,
were
I'm
just
gonna
like,
go,
I have the next step planned, and that's a
like, I
PhD,
have
and
the
after
next
that
step
is a
planned
murky
out.
gray.
Exactly. Like I was like, I have the next step. This is like a 17-year-old. This is the problem with like not 17-year-old. What time? I was like 20 or 21 when I graduated from college. So like this is like my 21-year-old brain was like, oh yeah, I have the next 5 years planned out. And I am interested in this. And when I am done, I will figure out the next step. And then I was like, Oh, the easy next step, the momentum was very strong to go into academia and to be a professor. In my mind, I was always kind of thinking like think tank, maybe like something where like research is valued, but like you can do it all the time. Um, and that was confirmed when I like was teaching as part of grad school. We like taught our own class, and I was like, yeah, this is nice, but like I want to go back to research now. Like I'm like devoting a lot of time to this, and I want to go back to research now and mentoring. So like it's not just about like I like the idea of imparting knowledge. Like mentoring is fun, but teaching is a whole different ball game, I feel like, because you get people various motivations that are there.
For sure. I have an education degree in addition to my psych degree. So yes,
Yeah.
I taught eighth grade social studies so that I could get my certification. And let me tell you, a lot of different reasons people are in that classroom. Eighth grade is a
It's
big diversification point for kids.
100%. I taught
So
grade chemistry for a month in in college, so I get it. Yeah, that's a hard age.
it is a hard age. So talk to me about, so your academia is pushing you towards academia because it's self-replicating. It's like a virus. Um, when did you sort of figure out, hey, that wasn't going to be it?
So I was so lucky that I had such a wonderful mentor who like, okay, that's all she knew. So like that was very much like, I know how to help you with this, like this track. But I figured out like a little bit later in my grad career after teaching, I would say. So like I was like in my fourth year of grad school when I taught, and I was like, okay, like I really need to start thinking about what else I'm going to do because I thought that the professor track would give me this like, oh, I can devote my whole time to research. And then I realized how much work it was to prep a class and deliver a class and how exhausting that was for me, being like somewhat introverted. And which is hard to believe because I feel like I come across as like bubbly, but like I'm secretly like exhausted from teaching. Like it's very exhausting. Anyway, so I decided probably in my fourth year, a little late, like, and at that point the momentum was very strong to go do a postdoc. Um, so I kind of consciously made the choice that I wanted to go in a more applied direction with my postdoc to make it easier to then transition out. Um,
And
so that's
had you talked to people in the industry? Like, did you have outside analogs or you just knew it was sort of not this?
so I knew it was not this, but I had also like talked to some policy folks. So I say policy folks, but like people at like Rand, for instance, or
Mhm.
other think tanks. And I was like, I think this might be more along the lines of what I want to do. I'd also talked to people that ran clinical trials as part of that process of like interviewing for postdocs. And I was like, oh, this could be it. Like this sounds awesome. There's a world where I could work in a medical center and teaching is not as big of a focus. Like you can do it if you want to, but it's not as big of a focus and you can support yourself on grants and you can run clinical trials all day long. That sounds awesome. So that is the direction that I went for my postdoc. So that's what got me to Pittsburgh.
And then, you know, but that's not where you go out into the industry. You don't become like,
Hmm.
there's an alternate universe where Chelsea is off
Yeah.
running clinical trials, right?
Right, right.
That is not the Chelsea that we ended up with, to our
Huh.
great benefit, in my opinion. But somewhere, some other universe is very happy with that, I'm sure. Tell me about like where the like you got knocked off that course and where Cyvello comes in and sort of like where this starts to go
Oh yeah.
in a
Oh
different
yeah.
direction.
Thank you for reminding me of all these like things that happened during my postdoc. So yeah, so I started my postdoc. I loved the mentor that I ended up working under. Ended up becoming like a research assistant professor running clinical trials of exercise. So here's swimming again, right? Like I and with neuroimaging. So both of those things ended up panning out. Only
And
I
are
was
you
moving
still
in.
swimming in your postdoc, by the way? Like, is this still a,
Okay, so I was, but like not on a team. I was like, I didn't join a master's team or anything. That was too much of a commitment. I was pretty burnt out after college. But I was still swimming. Like I still loved like being able to like keep up progress in something. And so Pitt had a nice pool and I still kept swimming. But like I liked clinical trials from the aspect of like we're trying to change someone's behavior, as opposed to just looking at correlations, which is a lot of what I did as a grad student. I try to identify relationships, and then I would try to like in the lab in a small experiment context, maybe test into them. But some of the things I became interested in at the end of grad school were things like mindfulness and exercise. And those are things that Georgetown did not have the infrastructure. Like they didn't have a big lab for me to go run an exercise test or anything like that. So that is very much the direction I went for my postdoc. I was going to run clinical trials of exercise, and I did. And I did go the research assistant professor track for a bit. But at the same time, because I was becoming known and publishing in the brain health space, health neuroscience is kind of the field that this exercise and brain combination has evolved into. Um, Someone from Cybella reached out to me and they said, "Hey, we're trying like a lot of people are focusing on the brain right now, and we're trying to build a brain health portfolio. Would you like to come and lead that?" And I said, "This looks like." I was still thinking, by the way, I knew I didn't want to write a K, which is like, which is like the Grammy of academics. Like if you get a K as like a postdoc, like you're set, like you're on the track to becoming like a full professor. I knew pretty early on I didn't want to write one of those. I just wanted to do my research and
Right.
and maybe apply for other grants, but like I didn't want to be on a perpetual track of training. That's not what I wanted to do. So so yeah, someone from Cyvello, like very at a great time, like reached out and was like, "We noticed, we searched for brain health on the Pitt website and you came up." And that's how that worked out. And I was like, heck yeah, I want to come build your brain health portfolio. And so that work involved, yeah.
Wait, let's double click on that because that's a moment, right, where another universe branches off and you
Yeah.
don't greet this with excitement. And what made you react with such excitement?
I was like, this is like so when they were explaining what was behind Cybello, Cybello stands for science and velo or did, and I don't think it exists anymore, but it was stand for science and velocity. And what they wanted to do in their mission was to take research or things that were like worthy of an invention disclosure. So things that could really help people that were being discovered in the labs at the university and the medical center and bringing them to businesses that could make use of them and like apply them in the real world. And I loved that mission. And I was like, yeah, there's a lot of really useful information that doesn't get translated into the real world on a time frame that felt acceptable to me.
Right.
Like, and that happened in my own research, right? Like exercise, like we know exercise can, if you do it and you do it as prescribed, like we know that it can prevent hippocampal, like a brain loss, brain tissue loss. We know that it can do that. And because we have done trials where you put people in an exercise intervention and it grows the brain. But that doesn't get translated to like medicine. Like it doesn't happen for a really long time. Like you have to have such a weight of evidence before like the medical field would feel comfortable making that like a prescription for exercise, for example. Like that was the vision, but like was that ever going to happen in my lifetime? Probably not. So yeah, so Cyvello offered something a little different. It offered like a way to help translate research from the bench into the real world, and that was a great like experience for me for sure.
And so,
Uh,
but it isn't true that you went out to Cybello and then like academia, like
yeah, no,
you
yes,
ended up
true.
you ended up as a research assistant professor. So it isn't that
Yes.
like you got out and then you went back.
Yeah, so okay, so I was like that was more of a consulting role. So I was still doing my postdoc as my full-time job, and that was like my side gig. And I liked it a lot. Um, but it was like its whole model was taking postdocs. It felt kind of exploitative, like it was, which is probably why it's no longer in existence, right? Like it like felt like it was taking postdocs, underpaying them, but giving them experience and like having them consult and use their expertise to help translate um, or write invention disclosures sometimes. So really, really like in the nitty gritty details of people's tests and um, help them grow their business if they wanted to, or like find a connection, like a bigger company that could help them market their product. Um, so I ended up doing that for Pitt, and then there was a similar one at a neighboring university at CMU, and I ended up doing that as well, working somewhat overlapping, but mostly like I did one and then I did the other. Um, and I was applying for jobs as well at the time. So I did know that I wanted to leave at that point. I knew that I didn't want to do necessarily commercial translation as a full-time job, but I wanted to do something applied, like applied behavioral science or applied science, I would probably call it at the time.
So tech,
I still
so
didn't
tech,
call
tech
myself a behavioral
transfer was
science.
sort of the stepstone
Yeah, I would
into
say.
this maybe. And what kind of things were
Yeah.
you're starting to apply? What are you applying for?
So I found myself weirdly applying for a lot of like not weirdly, I didn't call myself a people scientist, but when I read the job descriptions, like that is what I felt like I had the skill set to do. So I was just applying very selectively, um, and would come to the final round of some interviews and then I just like wouldn't, I would get all discouraged. I like wouldn't get it and I'd get discouraged. And I wasn't applying broadly at that point because I had a job and I was
You had a
happy.
job that
And
was academia.
yeah,
What sort of, you kept getting the final
yeah.
interview. Were they
And I
giving you feedback? Like, what did they want from you that they felt
some of
like?
them would come back and they would say like, hey, you're not ready for a director position, but like we have this lower position. In my mind, I was like, but I want to go apply to stuff now. Um, and at the same time, I was also getting a lot of um, I was having a lot of success in the academic side. So there was like kind of this period where I was kind of being pulled in both directions. And again, the momentum was like very strong to stay in academia. I was hitting all the boxes. I was publishing. I was applying for grants. That was not a huge success story, but like I would get one just enough to keep me interested, right? And then like it was like a variable reward. I would like get a small one or something, but like
Intermittent reinforcement
yeah,
is
exactly.
very pernicious.
I was like, okay. So I'm gonna apply for this R01 and like I just like got I think over the 4 years that I ended up staying. So 2018, we're now at like 2018, like 3 years after I started my postdoc was when I was like doing the site fellow stuff and um the um the the other consulting for the other university. And I knew I wanted to leave. I don't think I knew 100% what I wanted to do yet. Like I was being opportunistic and applying for things that looked interesting, but I don't, and I think maybe part of the reason I wasn't getting the jobs is because I don't think I had a clear story of how my skill set
Mm.
transferred to those specific jobs. And for that reason, I was coming across as more junior, which is definitely true. But in my mind, I was like, wait a second, I'm at the end of this like academic trainee, like I deserve a higher job, like a higher title. And I think that's a pitfall of a lot of people trying to transition out of academia. And I wish I could go back and tell myself that, like, you know what, taking a junior position is awesome because there's a lot to learn. Like there, and there is like, yeah. So anyways, that was 2018.
I, I mean, I think that's
Losing my,
really efficient. I had a conversation with somebody the other day, and
yeah,
have on my list of things I have to write a blog post about is the like, you're very used to doing a particular thing, right?
yeah,
And so you're standing here hitting home runs because like you're in academia, you're just hitting home runs. You're
yeah.
very good at the thing that you do.
The currency is like publications and like writing grants.
That's right.
And
And then they put you in a different sport and you're like, but I should still be really good at this, right? Because I was
right,
good at the other thing. And you don't in your mind really realize that like, hey, Michael Jordan could be the world's best fucking basketball player and a pretty damn
exactly.
mediocre baseball player. And it's just not, it doesn't, all of those skills don't necessarily translate.
Yeah.
And so
And given time, yeah, like right, if you take Michael Jordan and you put him on a baseball field for a couple years training, like maybe he could get there. He's got the athletic potential. You know what I mean? Like so the analogy I think transfers. Like so yeah, I think that's very true. Like taking a more junior position because you need to learn a whole new vocab. People tick in a different way in the corporate world than they do in academia. They don't care about the science behind a lot of stuff. They care about the bottom line and like being able to do good science, but also package it in a way that matters to people is like a skill set that you do not get necessarily in academia. So
yeah.
I got a little bit of it from a consulting side gig, but I don't think I did that enough. In order to be like good at the job I was like full-time jobbing, I couldn't do it enough to realize that. So,
Yeah, because academia is sucking you back in. But you do eventually break out. Like, talk to me about
uh,
Indeed.
yeah, so I applied to a behavioral scientist job at Indeed. And I was like, okay, not so sure about the HR tech aspect of it, but everything else about this job looks amazing. And I talked to someone on the team. So I went and stalked, I think you know Jesse.
Jesse
I
went
went
to go.
and
So, full disclosure for listeners of the podcast, Chelsea and I have a mutual friend, Jesse Discosi, who went to college with me at Swarthmore, because yeah, like liberal arts
I
kids.
didn't make that connection, but
Uh,
yes, but he yeah, so I was like, okay, so who works in behavioral science at the time at Indeed? And I stalked Jesse, found him on LinkedIn, uh forced him to talk to me, asked to talk to him about like what that job would look like more generally, like what life was like as a behavioral scientist in a corporation. And I left that meeting like knowing I wanted to join that team, and that was not how I like so I applied to it and I pestered and I was like, hey, have you like is there any news on this? So they like begrudgingly I think gave me an interview, and I managed to like get to the point where I convinced them that that I would be a good fit for this team. And I think the best sign of that was like I loved the conversation the informational interview that I had with a member of the team. So that was like point one. And then I
do you
loved
remember?
the interview.
Do you remember what you
Like
two talked about? Do you remember what you talked about with Jesse?
I don't I just remember like I only booked a half an hour and I was really worried about using like more of his time, and I just remember him we had such a good conversation that we went way over time, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Like I just used so much of your time." And I just remember him being like, "No worries. Today's a U day." Like it's a U day is like anyway, we at the company where we're at we used to get like random days off for self-care, which I think is like a great practice, but like he was on one and he was like totally willing to talk to me, and I was like, wow, like he just sounds like he has great work-life balance. The work sounds interesting, which is very much not what I was thinking I was going to hear. Like if you hear HR tech, you're probably like coming from like exercise science, which is something that I grew up doing. I was like, okay, how am I going to benefit, or like how am I going to help HR like with my skill set in, helping people change their behavior around exercise. But by the end of that call and by the interview process, the interview was fun, which is another like,
Talk,
it's
talk,
so
talk,
stressful.
talk us through it. What were what did they
Yeah.
ask you?
It's
What did you do? Why was it fun?
They asked us to do so candidates, I think there was like a written response, and I was like, okay, I can do this. Like it kind of builds your confidence. You're like, all right, I know what a chi-square is, or like I know like what I would do. And I remember the written question. Sorry, Rachel, if you're still using this, but I remember the written question was about how do we get people to eat better? And I was like, oh, cool. Like they're using a question that is in health. Like maybe I have a shot at this. Like I knew the people that worked on the team were cool at that point, but I was like, I still got to convince them that with my background, like I can do this job. And so I got through the written round because lucky for me, it was in like a lifestyle area. And I was like, I
Throwing it
know how to
right over
design.
the plate there.
Yeah, I was like, I know how to design an intervention to get people to eat better. Like, sure, I can help you out with that. And I was like, that was fun. And then I think the next couple rounds or so were revolved around like picking your favorite human bias. And I was like, cool, like let's think about this and like
Right.
and
What was your
designing.
favorite human bias? Do you remember?
I I think I used the halo effect. I don't know if it's my favorite, but it's the one that came to mind and the one that I could like, yeah, and the one that I could design an intervention around because they like gave us some foresight into the future. Like you're going to be asked to like design an intervention on this, and I was like, all right, I could use the halo effect for sure. Um, yeah, and so I was so super happy to like start working there and seeing that HR tech is actually incredibly interesting and could really benefit from behavioral science. Like there are a lot of behaviors around hiring, having experienced it like throughout the 4 years where I was trying to break out of academia. There are a lot of interesting behaviors around applying for jobs, being a job seeker, and then also on the other side around like being someone that's hiring um, that can be changed, that can be influenced. And
And
so now
talk to
I'm
me
like,
about, was the job what you thought it would be?
okay, so there was a point where I had a choice where I could have chosen to be on more of like the innovator team, which served as kind of an internal consultant. So it's like a team that kind of seeks out proactively projects where behavioral science could be useful, or I could be embedded in a product space um, with a bit more of a defined problem and be a behavioral scientist focused on that product. And I chose the latter. Um,
Because
I chose the latter because I was like, okay, I'm entering into a new field. I want a little bit more structure. Like I don't yet know like where the opportunity would be. So I want to be like in a space where I know this is my space for finding opportunities. And it actually turns out that when I got there, yeah, I did do a bit of work on the product, but I also started like just building relationships across the organization. I found myself doing a ton of projects that were not on my product. So I think that was a sign that like maybe behavioral science at businesses can work better where you have um, people across the business that are interested in behavioral science, but also like just being opportunistic. Like it's not always the case that you're going to have opportunities to have the biggest impact within a particular product and like pigeonholing a behavioral scientist into that, unless you know it's an area with a lot of problems, um, is probably, I don't know, if you're only going to have a few of them, maybe the model that I did not choose would have been a better way to go.
you
But
live,
lesson
you
learned.
learn.
Yeah.
What did so talk to if you were reverse pitching me on like what does a behavioral scientist at Indeed mean and do? What did that like? How did questions come to you? Did you spend a lot
Yeah.
of time trying to get people to ask about behaviors instead of thoughts and cognitions and emotions? Like, was it more on the
Yeah.
experimental side? Like, what did it really entail for you?
Yeah, so I don't think that the team necessarily exists anymore. There's a lot of layoffs, so I feel comfortable saying this at this point. But so I think like we were embedded under the UX org, and I really respect UXR. I think it's I think they're related disciplines. But I think that like we often would get problems identified from UXR, we would get handed to solve or get asked to opine on, or um, so that is the way oftentimes, or like a product manager would be like, I have this problem, like I cannot get, like we didn't redesign this, we're like paying employers to do this, and we cannot get them to do X. Um, either so two ways, I guess. One would be like from UX research. So what people say though, and like the actual problem are sometimes very different. So like the key was like being able to listen in on some of those interviews to be like, okay, they're saying this, but what are they really saying when they're showing us what they're doing? Um, so that was one route. And the other route was like just hearing in meetings, like this is a problem, this is not performing as expected. Um, so I think those are the kind of the two routes of how we would identify an opportunity. And then we would want to test into it. Whether that got prioritized though was a whole other ball game, which being like my first job out of academia, I don't think I was necessarily the best at playing.
Well, to your point, when you move from basketball to baseball, there's a new set of skills, and one of those is how the hell do you get a pilot run in a complex environment where people don't really want to run pilots for a variety of reasons.
How do you sell to them that this is a really important thing that every other objective that they have on here is going to hinge on? Um, I wish I like had pushed a little bit more on that. But my time at Indeed ended a bit earlier than expected, so I went on maternity leave, found out I was pregnant a couple months after I was hired, went on maternity leave, and unfortunately was impacted by the first layoff that Indeed did, the first in their history, I believe. But they have since done another one, which is why the behavioral science team is either very small or doesn't exist anymore.
And but you very quickly, post pregnancy and post Indeed, came back to Humana.
Uh,
Talk to me about like what that journey was like, why Humana, what you're doing there. Like,
yeah,
you've been there, year and a half, I think, at this point, something like that.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
like, tell me about Humana.
Yeah. So while on maternity leave, 10 out of 10 would not recommend interviewing on maternity leave, but this one I could not hold back. I had to apply for this job. I saw a behavioral economist position. Again, I don't think of myself as an economist necessarily, but like when I read the job description, I was like, heck yeah, like that is exactly what I want to be doing, a little bit more of a quantitative spin than I think I had at Indeed. A little more like experimental, a little more testing oriented, rather than piggybacking on to a test that's going to go on soon. Um, and I applied for it, and
And of course, there's
like
the health intersection, right? Which we already know
there,
is
oh
something
yes,
like,
that's why I couldn't resist applying for it because I said, oh my gosh, Humana is a Medicare Advantage company, so we're dealing with older adults almost exclusively. Like that ties in very nicely with my background and interests, and I'm back in health, which has always been a passion of mine. And I've never worked for a payer, I said to myself, so like maybe I won't get this, but like I very much, I think even the job description like mentioned like how do we get people to engage in more lifestyle interventions or like health interventions, and I was like, heck yes, like this is worth coming out of maternity leave early for. So,
well, and it's a very,
um,
I mean, Medicare Advantage is a very different kind of payer, right? Um, there are some of the larger umbrella corporations of things like Humana aren't necessarily about getting people to use their healthcare, right?
yeah.
But because of the way that Medicare Advantage is structured, I say this, by
Hmm.
the way, for those that don't know, I was the chief behavioral officer at Clover Health, which was a Medicare Advantage company that we took public a few years ago. Basically, you only make money in Medicare Advantage if you can figure out how to beat the actuarial table on making people healthy. Like that's pretty much the only way to sort of derive value in that model. So it
Yeah.
makes perfect sort of sense for the kinds of interventions you are interested in doing. Where do you sit in the org?
So we are our own team. We sit under clinical analytics right now. We've
Okay.
moved quite a bit, and I don't think our day-to-day has changed a lot, which says a lot. Like we're kind of like an independent, like mighty, small but mighty team. Um, uh, and we serve as internal consultants. So we work across the business. So we're not focused on a particular product, which is another reason why I didn't know that from the job description. But when I was interviewing, I was like, okay, like this is kind of the environment I'm looking for because it's the one that I found myself in a lot at Indeed, and like just naturally, like I don't know if it was me or if it's just the way that it was easier to do behavioral science or in this context. But I noticed right off that that's how the team was organized and that's how they operated. So because of that, it wasn't like incremental. We still have like programs of projects. Like we work with the same team sometimes over and over again, but because of that, we tend to get really interesting projects because we get pulled in on tough problems or like very complex problems that are well suited um, for behavioral science. Like, hey, we have this really complex program. We can't make a lot of changes, but we can make some to this area. We're like, all right, like we'll see what we can do. Like nudges. We're the nudge unit, the team that I'm on within behavioral economics. Um, uh, we kind of sell ourselves as being able to, we're not going to come in and tear up your program, though sometimes we want to. We can make small tweaks that might make a big difference. I think that's like very palatable. Business owners can swallow that a bit better than like you're doing everything wrong. Like we never want to send
All
that
wrong.
message.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we can optimize your program for you. Or like if you have a long-standing problem that no one's been able to solve, like we might be able to think out of the box and like given our experience in different sectors, um, come up with something that you haven't thought of before and that wouldn't require that's cheap to implement, but like might make a big difference.
Yeah. And I think we hear those same two themes, right? There's the like it exists, fine. There's the optimize and there's the like BHAG, right? The big hairy audacious goal, right? And like those are the two
Yeah,
places where behavioral science really tends to sing. That middle area in between is a little tougher, right? Like you can't halfway tear up a program. It's kind of hard, right? Like
yeah,
you either need to just
exactly.
sort
Yeah.
of minimal changes or maximal, like, blank slate, go nuts kind of stuff. What is the sort of biggest challenge for you today as a behavioral scientist? Where do you think that you still find it really hard to get the applied work done that you want to do?
That's a really good question. I think so. I have been very happy at Humana because I feel like behavioral science is truly valued. Like the other angle to the team that I think we've done really well is like um we causally, like we try to make causal inferences and test into whatever changes we're implementing. So we want to show you. We don't just want to tell you what's best, although sometimes we will say, this is the best practice. Like this tweak is the best thing to do. Like this will help. We don't need to test this. We know this from X, Y, and Z. But most of the time we do want to test in because the context in Medicare Advantage, as you were explaining, is like very different than a lot of other places. So just because it worked in one context doesn't mean it will work here. And we're always looking and convincing business partners like, okay, fine, you don't want to ramp this up 100% at once. We agree with you. Like let's test this and make sure that we're seeing the lift that we want to see from it. And if we are, then we'll scale it. So I think that's not really a challenge. I think that's a good thing. I think Humana does that. I think Humana does that really well. I think like the challenge within that though is that sometimes they want a solution, business partners want a solution right now, and it's it's easier sometimes to be like, all right, I can solve all your problems. Just implement this. We don't need to test it, or we can test it in this really sloppy way, this pre-post way, and we're good to go. Um, I think like investing a little bit of money in some cases into implementing a change in a test group is hard. And then conversely, sometimes it's hard to leave a control group out of something that's potentially really impactful because we want to see results now. And the time period that it might take to see the outcomes that we want to make sure we're seeing could be 6 months or a year. And like at that point, we haven't realized savings on the whole control group we left out. So like that can be a challenge. Um,
Yeah.
but it's like a good challenge. And I think like for the most part, like business partners, like the business in general is like really receptive to that and has bought into like testing is best kind of mentality.
What's interesting to you outside of Humana these days? I know you chime in on the behavioral science conversations that happen from time to time, like where, there's this huge debate happening around, sort of complex systems and sort of how individual behavioral challenges, may lead us astray from considering super complex systems. There's this whole theme of, there's a lot of talk right now about what are the right frameworks and what, there's a sort of movement towards consolidation, or like, hey, can we get rid of some of the older cruft that
Yeah.
we use? Like what kind of stuff, when you find yourself tempted to wade into the fray, what kind of stuff is like, no, I've got strong feelings about that one.
I just think like almost 100% of the time, like if we can make something super easy, like that is the way to go. Like let's not get all fancy. Like most of the frameworks, they're all super aligned. Like I honestly don't care. We can have as many frameworks as you want. They're all like they're all really aligned. Uh, that's fine with me. I'm not necessarily worried about that. Like I think whatever framework makes the most sense in the particular business context that people find themselves in or like feel that their business partners buy into is fine to use. But I think that what's missing or like what tends to work most of the time is just making things easy for people. And that is the strongest like intervention you can do and the one that is often the one that people don't see and the one that's like hardest to do. Like, why can't we just make everything a default or like flipping the script on like how we naturally do things? Like, why are we sending a hundred pages of text to someone when all we need to do is make the appointment for them, or like all we need to do is do this for them? Um, yeah, so I don't know if I have a strong opinion about all those
I mean,
theoretical
but there's real
discussions.
science. There's real science there, right? We know,
Yeah,
right?
100%.
I did a bunch of studies that showed that, when you ask people to get people to do something more, we tend to gravitate towards promoting pressures. But that means there's all this unmet need on the inhibiting pressure. Like, you don't have to convince people of most things. You just have to make it stupidly easy or the default so that they
Yeah.
don't have to decide, and then they just do it.
Or imagine like taking stuff out so that the things that you do send are like more salient. Like that is another whole, I think like we tend to add things a lot. Like we're like, oh, we definitely need to add something in to make people do something. What if we like thought as a field of taking things out? Like what if that was the intervention was like, yeah, and I think that that ties right along with like making things stupidly easy. Like, okay, like we're not going to add a step in. Like, why don't we just take out these four steps? Like, why aren't we starting with this? Or
That's
yeah,
so hard to
flipping the
do in
order.
MA, right? Like, you're in
So
a
hard to do.
regulated space. Like,
I was going to say
I spend
super
a,
regulated.
I spend an
Mhm.
inordinate amount of time with lawyers going, I really promise you, we do not need to like
Mm.
include this 200,000 page disclosure. Like, probably we could find some better way of doing this. And so having good legal partners and having good business partners that allow you to
100%.
sort of like, because people often think of things, legal is very binary. It's sort of legal or illegal, right? It's
Yeah.
sort of like right or no. It's like there's like a arc of risk, and there's an arc of sort of how do we figure out the best way to do these things, and giving you 300 pages of disclaimers maybe not always the right way to do it.
Yeah, 100%. Or like, where do you put them? Like, maybe not leading in with those. Like, that's gonna make people put down your paper right off. But I think I have a better answer to your earlier question. Like, what's the biggest challenge in this space?
Oh,
And you reminded me when you were like, it's a super regulated space. So, like, at an insurance company, at a payer, it is very hard to see the actual behavior that we want to be trying to influence in members. And like, purposefully, we are separated from the process, from like the actual providers that are delivering care on behalf or getting paid and reimbursed by Humana. So I'd say that's the biggest challenge of doing behavioral science in this space. And the data that we get on whether the behavior happened is claims.
right.
So they're often lagging a good deal from when we want to be seeing them. So I think that goes into the challenge that I did mention, which is that sometimes it's hard, it's a hard sell to test because you're going to have to wait for an answer um, when sometimes the action is needed now.
When that
So
disintermediated change is a key, I mean, we see that across tons of industries, right? Where, you know, make it move, but you can't touch it, right? Like you
yes,
have to work through some disintermediated force. I think it's why social psychologists, and folks who are encouraged to look at larger systems sometimes
Mhm.
find the transition easier because they're very used to not being able to, whereas if you came from an extraordinarily clinical psych background,
Experimental.
you're like,
Yep.
oh yeah, like I could directly intervene, and you're like, oh.
Exactly. You're right. I just kind of put that together here. Like that is exactly the challenge that is hard for me. Is like I am so used to being able to see the like I came from a background of testing in the lab, but like designing the actual thing that people were going to be doing and then like bringing them in and watching them do it. Like and that is not possible in this context. And it's like a fun challenge, but it is one that like sometimes on the bigger problems keeps us up at night because it's it's like we don't actually know. We say we want you to do this and we think this is how it's happening, but like we're not sure.
That's science. Science is a lot of being not sure. Chelsea, thank you so much for coming on the show and spending some time with me today. I mean, I think every behavioral scientist has a different story, but they're all related. We all have ended up here for a variety of roads, but I think it teaches us something about sort of this place that we are sort of collectively growing together. And I appreciate all you've done in the field to sort of help people see this pathway out of academia and into these other places. And I'm so glad that you've ended up at Humana, where you get to actually do the thing. I think we have to end on the most important question though, which is, post academia, post baby, post busy life. Are you still swimming?
Oh my gosh, I have not, Matt, I've not been in a pool in a very long time. But that is but I am lifting. I am still like physically active and I'm walking and doing things that I can do with two kids in tow now. So
How, and
so not
how old are your kiddos?
4 and 20 months.
But so they're not quite at the 20-month-year-old's not quite at swim with mom age yet.
Exactly. That is the next challenge is like getting them to swim with me might make that easier. But yeah, more to
Well,
come on that. I'm not teaching my own kids to swim. I feel like they learn best from someone else.
but do you say more? Do you think I find parents either are in the like we'll throw you in and let you partially drown, or the like, oh no, I can't watch you sputter, and so I can't actually teach you the skill that is swimming because there's a little sputtering that goes along with it. Which
I
which
think
which
the
mistake
former.
are you?
Oh, so I think I am like I need to have someone else teach my kid because I think the best way to teach them might be to throw them in and like let them figure it out. Like that is the best way to learn to swim is to like feel your body, right? And like figure it out naturally, intuitively. But I cannot do that as a mother. I cannot do that. So yes, so I turn my back and I let the swim instructor do that, one that I trust very much. So I think the tough love in that situation is like you're gonna find yourself in a surprising situation around water, and I want you to know what to do. So
Well, anytime you come to San Diego, The water is warm.
Oh my
The
gosh,
weather is
yes.
great. Come
Some
on by.
social accountability. That's what I need.
Where San Diego's quite the hub of applied behavioral scientists. We've got Steph
Yeah.
Habif, we've got Gene Murphy, this good group of people here. Just come on over.
Sunny, you're telling me this when Pennsylvania is starting to get cold. So
or excuse me, I'm very good at behavior change. I know when to time my messages. It's
an opportune message. Yeah.
that's right. It's I believe about 74 and sunny right now. So
Oh
just
man.
come on by. Chelsea, thanks
I
so much for
know.
coming with me.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. Thank you. Thank you very much for the invite.
Of course.